Hey, folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He is Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald-Times. It is Tuesday, July 29th, 2025, I suppose. It's 89 degrees outside. Thankfully, the podcast studios, the Mind Your Manners studios, virtual or not, are air-conditioned. And we are here today to talk to you about primarily, in fact, I would say exclusively, the fact that Indiana football is going to break camp tomorrow. Again, we're talking on the Tuesday of the last week of July. They will open camp on the Wednesday, July 30th, and we are just going to set the stage for that in a lot of different ways. Starting with this one, Mike, your Vegas adventures last week were myriad and contained multitudes. How much did you enjoy your time in Sin City? And obviously, relative to our podcast, just what threads did you wind up pulling on most out there from an IU perspective?
Well, I always enjoy a jaunt out west to Las Vegas. It's a great city, and there's plenty to do. Gambling,
The city that never sleeps,
and food never disappoints. In terms of Big Ten Media Days, and I wrote a lot about this. Obviously, I guess too. At the end of this, I'm curious from your perspective, from the outside, because like in the moment on the first day, Tuesday is when Indiana went. Like they were the sort of focal point of the discussion, sort of in the spotlight. Much of it had to do with scheduling. And obviously the kind of the fallout from what we reported in June about them canceling the UVA series. Cignetti came prepared with some statistics about the SEC, said that they were just adapting the SEC scheduling model, and then sort of the discussion took off from there. And they went on the same day as Ohio State, but all the headlines seem to be generated. From my perspective, were about just the Hoosiers, and some might say, well, that's like negative because people are criticizing their schedule and how non-conference, how easy it is. But talking to people, I don't think that bothers Indiana at all. I think that they believe in the strategy they've set up. They're willing to pivot when the college football playoff format's determined. If the best path forward is to scrap all those, not all of them, but some of those non-conference games against lesser opponents aren't advantageous to their playoff chances, they will change them. So right now, they're fine with being in sort of the spotlight because this is not a place where Indiana football has been very often. And it's on a topic that they feel good about. And I will point out multiple coaches, I think the league in general agrees with them, but multiple coaches were very public about that. Jed Fish, probably the most vocal about that, retweeted a clip of Cignetti talking about adapting the SEC model and poking fun at them and saying like, yeah, I have Jed Fish specifically went even a step further than Cignetti's gone by saying like, I have no interest in scheduling a Power 5 opponent if as is based on the SEC not having 9 conference games and the way the scheduling models are currently structured. So that to me was the like sort of overarching, we can get into the minutia and some of the news about injuries and things, but like if you're talking about big picture, which I know you love to talk about, Indiana in the spotlight at Big Ten Media Days, I don't think you'd rather have it any other way if you're Curt Cignetti or Scott Dolson or anyone in this program.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, and we've talked. I think we did some of the scheduling discussion, in our last podcast. I don't think we need to rehash all of that. But what I thought was interesting was not so much Cignetti's comments. I think you could broadly expect him to come out and defend his program. That's just kind of who he is. That is very much just sort of his way. it was that those comments, and it probably, as you say, helped that it was on the first day, but it was that those comments seemed to actually sort of set the agenda. Like, I've been at Big Ten Media Days where Indiana is a topic. 2021 is an example, and I was going to write a little bit about this later today, where Indiana is has at least some of essentially the sort of attention of the conference because of like what's happened on the field and what's happened, sort of recently in developments with the program, or maybe, obviously coming off of a good season, or even I remember Tom Allen making some waves in 2017 at his first media days when he actually stood up and said, I don't think we should be playing games on Friday nights. I appreciate why the commissioner, is doing that, but I don't think we should be. But those are just kind of isolated incidents. The idea that Indiana was sort of like carrying the narrative for the conference a little bit. Again, some of it's timing, both in terms of when Cignetti was speaking and also just the fact that Indiana had kind of been inserted, sort of put center stage on this debate in recent days or recent weeks. But the fact that Indiana had been is, the fact that the SEC had thought to say we should make an example of Indiana as to why we're right and they're wrong, that also doesn't happen very often. And so the idea that Indiana was kind of, like I said, setting the agenda in some ways for the conference, I mean, that conveys I'm not trying to act like, all Indiana's a big football program now, no question, but like that does convey an importance that I think, just quite frankly, Indiana football has not enjoyed when it has been in kind of the conference-wide spotlight historically. And I just thought it was interesting just the way that the Big Ten seemed to sort of respond and rally around the idea that in this case, they're happy to endorse the idea of Indiana as an avatar for the Big Ten's position in all this, and B, really vocally support Indiana for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Tony Petitti, and it's interesting because Tony Petitti is trying to thread the needle, and that I think he would prefer marquee games in the non-conference schedule that they could market and sell and push. And so, but at the same time, his point is there has to be incentives to play those games. And right now we have a system that doesn't do that. And so how do we solve that? We fix the system, not criticize Indiana. Like Indiana is taking advantage of trying to set them best up for success. And that's all you can do as a coach, administrator, athletic director, whatever. And so he talked about that. He took multiple questions about that, even at the top of the press conference, and not just setting the agenda. When you mentioned Tom Allen with the Friday night games, and that's sort of like a localized or regional issue with the Big Ten at the time. And those don't drive, like this was like national, like not just, it went beyond the Big Ten. It broadened the SEC. It is like the discussion sort of underpinning like the college football playoff discussion. And so it's a big deal and it's a big spotlight. And look, Cignetti has only been here 1 year or one and a half years, one season. And like, this is where they're at. Like, that's beyond sort of, I think, the wildest imagination anybody had in terms of like what their profile would be after those two sort of final years of Tom Allen's tenure, where it looked pretty bleak. And to be here now, and with on top of that, the high expectations for the team, which I think are there, you have to sort of just kind of marvel at the right, the profile they're at right now, considering where they were at. Like I said, my first assignment here on the beat was that 2023 media days, and Indiana came and went without a whisper, really. And so I just think that it's just a interesting juxtaposition.
Well, and I would go even a step further in not a step further, but like almost at a more basic level, I guess, if I'm trying to orient my own direction.
Those are two opposite things. I'm going to go a step further, but keep it really basic.
Yeah, it's trying to figure out if I'm going forward or down. If I'm Matthew McConaughey in this situation, am I in the Lincoln, or am I giving the Oscar speech? Like, when was the last time Indiana had a coach that everybody was kind of looking forward to hearing from at media days? Like, somebody I know who it was. It was Brandon Walker at Barstool, and I think Mike Kadick, his move to Barstool has brought that universe a little bit closer to IU, understandably. And Brandon Walker seemed a little bit upset by Cignetti's scheduling comments, and he said something like, "This guy has one good year and starts acting like Steve Spurrier." And I just thought, he's been acting like Steve Spurrier for like a lot longer than just the last 12 months. Like this is just very clearly who he is. But I remember the way SEC Media Days used to get when Spurrier was about to take the podium, because everybody wanted to hear what he was going to say, because Spurrier was always colorful, and you could always count on somebody to get zinged or him to just say funny stuff, burn a reporter or whatever. Cignetti's not quite that way, but he does have some of that personality to him. And I think this is maybe how, obviously, the wins and losses are the primary thing, but the personality of the coach, I think, is the other way that, as an accompaniment to the success, your program becomes a little bit more relevant, a little bit more center stage, a little bit more, everybody's talking about Indiana, because I think you have a coach that, and we've talked about how he's actually probably been a little bit less quotable this year than he was in his first 12 months in the job. But when you have a coach who is willing to kind of embrace the idea of just saying what he thinks, and, not being afraid to drop in kind of some dry humor, not being afraid, as you said, to come prepared, maybe with a little bit of a burn for the SEC. It was just interesting to me, because it was clear that people wanted to hear what Cignetti had to say, whether they were going to agree with it or not, whether they like Curt Cignetti at the podium at Big Ten Media Days had more buzz than, I would say, at least 12 of the league's coaches, probably more. And it's obviously because of the success Indiana had last year, but it's also because you have this coach who's compelling because he wins and he shows his personality, and he's not afraid to say something that's going to get clipped for the internet. And he wears that stuff too. There was somebody who said to me, I did a radio interview last week, somebody who said to me that they thought Cignetti's, personality was great all the way up until maybe he went a little too far with the comments on the game day set before the Notre Dame game about beating top 25 teams or whatever. And I said, yeah, that's fair. But he even owned that. Even after the game, he just came out and said,
we got our butt kicked. Yeah.
He just said let's just call it what it is. This, I don't know if endearing is the word, because I think there are people that have strong opinions on Curt Cignetti in a lot of different directions, but he has, kind of used this Big Ten platform and the success that he's had at Indiana that's afforded it to him to become a coach that, when he's talking, people will listen. And I don't know when was the last time, quite frankly, Indiana had a football or basketball coach like that. And I think that's, the winning has to be the first thing, but that kind of personality is something that I think shouldn't go sort of appreciated.
And I want to be careful. It's genuine, but I don't think it's sort of, and some of it may be off the cuff, but I don't think it's as off the cuff as you like. I think it is calculated in the sense that he came in with a plan to fight the apathy that had that had settled into this fan base and settled into this program, because he viewed it as the only way you were going to sustain success is by getting rid of that. And you had, and one way to do that is become, and I think he proudly wears it, the face of the program, and not being sort of a wallflower, not being sort of meek, that you have to sort of stand above the rest. Obviously, if you get killed by 60 points every game, that's not going to work. But if you can back it up results, then you're going to sort of supercharge, I think, the process of rebuilding and sort of transforming, trying to kickstart some of these bigger picture ideas and projects. And I talked about the stadium. I talked about, just rebuilding this roster. And so I think that that's all part of it, right? That he came in with a very clear vision for what he wanted to do to try to get this rolling. And I've talked to people that covered him or knew him at James Madison. Like this, it's not he's not a different person now than he was then. Like to your point, that is genuine, but I do think it is calculated in the sense that this is part of how he wanted to turn this thing around because he's talked about a lot that first 24 hours where it was just like you're arriving at your own wake or something where this fan base was just like good luck, man, that's gonna be tough, and it's like no, we got this. And so I think that this is an extension of that, and obviously, and he's always talked about looked forward and said, look, the winning is what's going to make this all work, and talked about that Big Ten Media Days. It's all going to, one of his favorite phrases is going to be determined between the white lines and all that. But you can win these events, and that's a good thing for an Indiana football that, like I said, was largely been an afterthought, with the exception of that 1 year for much of this, decade easy, but going back much farther than that. I'm just saying in like the current landscape of college football.
No, I mean it reinforces the idea that Indiana means business. That's cliche, but it reinforces the idea that Indiana's comfortable on this stage. I guess that's like that's what it seems like to me. Is it reinforces the idea that Indiana didn't just sort of get to this level, but Indiana is comfortable walking, talking, acting like it belongs at this level. And I think there's value in that when you're trying to instill that confidence in your players, when you're trying to instill that sort of belief in recruits, or when you have to go hire a new coach or whatever. There's value in being able to reach for a sort of just like self-assurance that I think Cignetti really just exudes just very naturally. Because it's the other part of this is, I say this a lot when people talk about it. It's not a show. Like this is, as you said, this is who he was long before he got to Indiana. This is who he is. And you can love it, you can hate it, but this is his personality. And I think it kind of traces back to one of those sort of root discussions that I find myself pivoting back to when people ask about the future for IU football. And I don't know. Indiana might wind up retreating to the mean rapidly. I've seen it before, but one of the things I find myself saying a lot is, everywhere Curt Cignetti's been, he's kind of done it whatever he thought was the best way, and it's always worked. And now he's seen it work at Indiana. Just assuming that that's going to stop, I think is probably dangerous. I think that's probably faulty, even if at some point it does. Like, for example, when people say, what's he going to do when all these JMU transfers cycle out of his program? How's he going to win then? And the answer is, well, he's the one that recruited all those players and developed all those players. Like, he identified those players as athletes who are capable of winning at a significant level in Division I college football and in the football bowl subdivision. And the idea that that's just going to stop it kind of runs parallel to the idea that the way he is, the sort of confidence he projects is an act. Like I don't think it is. I think the process works is what I'm trying to say.
And it's instructive to sort of, not to make it all about him, but I mean, like, think about what he's done in the last 5 years. He's recruited all these players at James Madison. They went up from the FCS to the FBS, had no problem. There was like no bump in the road. Took a bunch of players from the group of five to the Power Five, hit on nearly all of the James Madison kids. Then on top of that, we had probably whatever metric of success you want to do it, like had probably one of the most successful transfer classes in the country last year in terms of production and hit rate. Like that was pretty astounding. And, it's not like, yes, Indiana in the set was like an overnight success, but Curt Cignetti was not. And the blueprint that like he's talked about and touted has carried him through a pretty crazy sort of ascension, just in terms of like, look, yeah, he had success at James Madison, but James Madison moved up a level while he was there, and they were like hit milestones that they never thought possible in those first 2 years at the FBS level. Like that's really impressive. And so when you talk about that, I think that like that's sort of, I think, when you talk about, Indiana falling back or Indiana struggling, and you point to his resume, like there's real examples of like how he's just kind of countered that and not had that problem where you don't fall back and you don't take a giant step back in some tough situations too. Like Elon wasn't an easy place, and he had multiple years of success there. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I get it. Like the last time this happened for Indiana, things did not go well, but Curt Cignetti's not had any issues sort of finding new talent, replacing talent, developing talent. And that's sort of, I guess, why he's been successful, never had a losing record.
Let's talk about finding new talent because Indiana is going to need to find some. I know you talked to the three players there were Mikhail Kamara, Aiden Fisher, and Elijah Surratt. No real surprises. I know you talked to them about essentially, players that they think could be on the verge of breakout seasons. I know you and I have had those discussions in some of our season preview sort of, I guess, what do you call it, like roundtable series with Aaron Ferguson. You've also put together some position previews that you've been rolling out over the last couple of days. I think my stock line for Indiana has become, I think Indiana's got a good baseline at basically every position, and I also don't think Indiana has any position on the field where there isn't a question mark somewhere. I mean, like other than maybe quarterback, like there's, I mean, like and one of the questions now that maybe changes a little bit now that we know Drew Evans is cleared for fall camp, because that was my question on the offensive line was, is Drew Evans healthy? And if he's not, then which side is Bray Lynch going to play on? And therefore, how are you going to sort of array, Zen Michalski and Khalil Benson? I still have questions about Michalski, Lynch, Benson, that whole axis kind of over on the right side of the line and how it winds up shaking out. But, that is kind of an example of maybe starting to get some of those questions answered. We need to figure out the division of labor at running back and tight end. Where does the depth come from at receiver? Where is Micah Jackson playing? Are any young players ready? Obviously, there are a lot of pieces, if not questions, and certainly at least pieces that need to be fit into place along the defensive line. The question of Elijah Hardy stepping in for a player that I think we both thought was probably one of the most unappreciated players on the team, if not in the conference last season, and Jalen Walker, who was very, very important for that defense. And then you got good bones of a secondary led by D'Angelo Pons and Amari Farrell, but you'd still do have to go find, two corners and a safety and some depth. I guess I think I know the answer to this, but I'll start here. What position do you think Indiana's got to sort of get the most clarity on the quickest here as fall camp opens up?
Yeah, I guess I'd couch it. I view the roster has far fewer question marks than you do. I guess I'd start there. Like receiver, like depth's sort of an issue, but like I don't really have any qualms about like the top line production guys, and like quarterback, like you said, as drama-free of an offseason of a team at quarterback I've probably covered in my career, like over like 15 years in college, in terms of like no drama. The 1 and 2 is sort of like set from the start, and there was no like subterfuge by the coach. The first two, they're brothers, obviously, so that helped, but they're working sort of hand in hand to sort of improve each other. Like, and I think a lot of the positions you can kind of see sort of where the talent is and what, maybe like you said, the division of labor is a question mark, but I don't necessarily think the talent level is a question mark. Like running back, like I think they're pretty set. They've got 3 guys. How that all shakes out, sure, but that's not as much of a question mark at the position than like who do they have a guy capable of being a starter, I guess would be my point of difference with you there. To me, the biggest question mark, because I think even with like offensive line, I do have questions, like you said, about some of how the positions tend to shake out, but they've got 5 guys with starting experience no matter what happens, right? Zen's sort of the outlier. Does he win a job? Maybe. They got starting experience all across the line. The defensive line, I think, is where sort of the questions come in because they're replacing everybody in the starting lineup except Kamara.
I was right.
Well, I think it's
not that hard to guess, but
I think it's obvious because like, look, and I think Kamara was fantastic, and I think he didn't get the attention he deserved. But man,
anyone write a story about him?
I did.
Last season, did anyone write like an extension feature about Mikel Kamara?
I did. I can get you the link.
Football?
I can get you the link. Teams can really scheme against him if nobody steps up. Like, look, and I wrote this in I think the defensive line preview is running in 2 days. CJ West was as good of a player on the or as impactful of a player on the team down the last 5 to 6 weeks as anybody on the other side of the ball. And like his athleticism that was actually measured at the combine is freakish level, right? And so to say you have a ready-made replacement, even a guy that's productive, probably doesn't do it justice to what he was capable of. And James Carpenter, overshadowed by West, but I mean, a guy that was in that system for 5 years. And so that's tough. Linnell Carr obviously stepped up and had been a starter for Indiana the year before, but you've got all those new pieces. You got a mix of young guys and now transfers that didn't arrive in the winter, that came in the spring. And so that's a position where I do think, Mikel Kamara was very excited about the talent they have, and he was very bullish and sort of called out all of them and gave me kind of a rundown on each of them. But I do think that that's sort of more wide open in terms of playing time and how it all looks. And you're replacing just more of the talent just because you only got one guy returning. Tucker was in the rotation, but not to the extent as a bunch of the other guys that are gone.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker is one that I would look at. He is, I think it's probably fair to say, unless something's changed about his body in the last 6 months, he's a 3 technique. He's more of, if you're thinking about this positionally, and I understand that football doesn't quite work this way anymore, but if you're thinking about this positionally, he's more the James Carpenter replacement if he's a starter than he is the CJ West replacement. But he actually is one of, and I'm pulling up the PFF numbers while we're talking here. He is, in fairness, one of the highest graded returning interior linemen in the Big Ten. And that's not, I mean, you're right. He did not play nearly as much as someone like CJ West or someone like James Carpenter. But I mean, he still played, I'm getting it. I'm almost there. He still played 306 snaps last season. That's not a low number. That's not an enormous number. By comparison, CJ West, who really didn't get into the rotation until about week 5 or so, he played 420. Mason Graham at Michigan played 548. There's a much higher ceiling for how much you can play. I think James Carpenter, I can't find him on this list. James Carpenter played 573.
Yeah, James Carpenter was defensive tackles typically don't have kind of those numbers of stuff.
Well, but Mason Graham played that. Tyleik Williams played that. That's the expectation for a frontline starter, is my point. For somebody who is a healthy, regular rotation player, 550 or so snaps that's your ceiling. Tucker only played 306. But listen, that's also not nothing. That is there's a baseline. And he was very good, very well graded, in particular against the run, which any coach is going to say that's got to be the starting point. That's got to be the base. I look at Tucker, and he kind of got lost in the shuffle of all the JMU transfers last season. But the other thing he has is he's been identified from the start of his college career by this staff, going back to when he was in high school, saying he's got the tools, he's got the traits, he has the things we need to unlock in a player to make it work. I just wouldn't be surprised if, and again, I don't know if he has that direct impact on Mikel Kamara. I think part of what made CJ West work was the relationship between the rush end and the nose, because the nose naturally just commands more attention, occupies more space in the pass rush and just in at the line of scrimmage, period. But I wouldn't be surprised if 4 or 5 games in, we're not talking about, or we are talking about Tyrick Tucker as maybe one of the players on this defense that's really important that we wouldn't have listed as among the most important coming into the season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to your point about his workload, if he was the only question mark, I don't think it would be much of a question mark. If you're just replacing Carpenter with Tucker, I think that's that'd be an easy thing. But I mean, you're replacing everybody. On the opposite side of the end, it did take. We've talked about West taking time to sort of acclimate to what the system was and what they wanted from him. So you bring in 2 spring transfers, Stephen Daly and Kellen Wyatt. Are they going to? I know it's the end, not the defensive tackle, but are they going to need more time to sort of adjust? You got Mario Landino there, who kind of rotated throughout the defensive line that they're really high on, but is obviously a true sophomore. And then you got the 2 other transfers at defensive tackle, Hosa Wheeler and Dominic Ratcliffe. Like, how does it all look? How's it? I just think it's a lot of new faces, a lot of new pieces, more so than at any other position sort of on the roster, maybe tight end, but just because there's only one spot. You're replacing Zach Horn with 2 potential other guys, but just so many other question marks in terms of how does it all look and fit. And so that would be, I think at the top of the list. And then, the secondary is sort of interesting to me because I think that, they didn't really, they made a change that sort of, I think people kind of forget midway through the year, like after the bye week, Terry Jones goes to the rover spot, and then Amari Farrell comes away from that and goes to just the regular safety spot. And so like that, they didn't land on sort of a group back there until midway through the season. And that was sort of what unlocked kind of that next level for the defense in that Big Ten portion of the schedule. Does it take them some time to get there this year? Have they sort of locked in on each guy's, where they best fit? Obviously Farrell, we know, but, Luis Moore, Boykin, where do those guys fit in sort of that, they got that third position safety, that rover spot, who best fits there and who best fits next to Farrell, and do they move around? I think that's probably the next kind of position, just because if you look at last year, it did take them a long time to settle on that.
Yeah, I think, and I said this in one of our roundtables where we were talking a little bit about sort of position churn and breakout players that need to step up more. I said the one thing that would give me some confidence in Indiana is that you have a known at almost every position, and especially on defense. You've got Kamara at the line of scrimmage. You've got, and maybe at least to a certain extent, Tyreek Tucker. You've got another player there that played a quantity of snaps in the Big Ten last year, is familiar with the staff, et cetera. You got Aiden Fisher at linebacker. There's no concern there. The guys behind him, have some experience as well, obviously, but Fisher is a level above. And then you at least have these questions about, as you say, how are you going to arrange that sort of nickel spot? Is it just going to be your third corner goes down to the nickel? Are you looking at one of your safety transfers? Lewis Moore is back. Boykin is in. Who wins that other corner spot? I mean, right now I'd probably, put smart money on Rylan Gandy. I don't know if we're allowed to say that given everything that's going on in Major League Baseball right now, use those sorts of colloquialisms. But I would probably bet on Gandy if you made me, but I don't think it's by any means decided. But you at least have a cover corner that is all Big Ten quality. You have a safety that is, at very least, I would say Amari Farrell's all Big Ten quality. He didn't win all Big Ten last year, but he's probably one of those players that phases into that group within the squad, or within the conference rather, this year. If you're Bryant Haynes, you come into camp at least being able to say, I know I've got impact players at every level, not just returners, but impact players at every level. And if I can keep those pillars in place, keep them healthy, and build around them, then again, especially with the nature of the way this schedule unfolds, relatively navigable non-conference season, don't go on the road till week 5, etc. I think you feel like I can, by the time we need it, I can have my defense operating at something approaching the level of what it was a year ago.
Yeah, no, and I agree. When you've got those 3 sort of pillars on each level, you've got leadership, you got all the qualities you're looking for, and I think that makes you feel good that you can lean on those guys if there are times where some guys are out of position or there's some question marks, some inexperience. Like he's got, they're not. Look, this defense had one returning starter the year before. I know a couple guys are from JMU that carried over with the staff. But I mean, from year to year, just the stark difference in experience level and just how you got to feel about that group, I think is huge. On offense, you mentioned the offensive line. Interested to see where that all shakes out. Look, I think it's a quick turnaround for Drew Evans with the Achilles. Those rehabs can take up to 12 months to kind of get back to.
I was surprised. I was surprised when that came out of media day, just because I think we've all kind of assumed that was like a rupture or a tear, and especially for bigger athletes. And this is not me calling offensive linemen fat. Trust me, they're in better shape than I am. But especially for people who are just bearing more weight, like that is a tricky one to come back from. I was surprised.
And there's a difference between being cleared to and back to like 100% where there's no risk of injury versus like to have the explosiveness you had previously before the injury. So that can come later. I think you kind of look at it and you circle that Illinois game and say, like, can we get him some reps? Can we get him in the mix during the non-conference? And like that's when you kind of pinpoint where he's ready to go. But then Benson's the other question mark. Like Cignetti has talked about him as a tackle throughout the entire offseason, and then opened the door a little bit at media days and said, we'll kind of see. Like, because just your most straightforward path is just to go with your 5 returning starters. If Evans is a little behind, does Benson figure into there? Or do they think that maybe he's the best there now at guard versus tackle? So I think that he's sort of the question mark.
It also is like, I mean, I checked with a couple of friends that cover Ohio State, and what I heard back is basically that, like, if Zin Mahalski played guard at Ohio State, nobody ever saw it. Like,
he's a tackle. I don't think he's no.
Yeah, so like it's a little bit of like you always say best player in every position, but I think last year shows you the value of utility as well. Like Indiana kind of keeps Tyler Stevens back. I don't think necessarily Stevens was going to dramatically outperform anybody that was starting ahead of him, but it also really helped that Indiana had Tyler Stevens there when a hole opened on the line because he could play so many different positions. If Benson can play guard or tackle and Mahalski can only play tackle, is there more utility, especially as you say, if you are easing Drew Evans in keeping Benson at guard because he plugs more holes, essentially.
Right, he's your swing guy on the bench. If anybody goes down,
you
can plug him in basically anywhere and kind of shift things around. And so I think that's the offensive line just has that intrigue in the sense that, or do you keep Benson just on the bench for now and get a young guy reps at guard? I would butcher his name. The redshirt freshman that was Adewale. What's his name for the guy?
I think it's Adedemola Ajanai, I believe, or Ajanai. I'm not sure which.
We'll go with that. And so do you get him reps too? Because I mean, obviously you're eyeing the future a little bit. And he worked with the first team offense, obviously throughout the spring for Evans. So, I mean, in terms of the offense, like that's where most of my sort of, I think, question marks are, because I just think you see how it all shakes out everywhere else. Or in terms of production or where it's concentrated. The offensive line, I think, they could genuinely, they're a surprise or two week one based on what that starting lineup looks like.
I'm also curious about like not just like position battles within the offense, but also, when we talk about the running back room, when we talk about the tight end room, I wouldn't be shocked if their roles in the offense have been reimagined a little bit, not dramatically, but like Roman Himby is a really good pass catching back. If you look at his time at Maryland, his great strength is getting into space, whether that's, getting to the second level. He's torn off a couple long touchdown runs on Indiana where basically there was just no contain at the second level and he was gone. Getting him involved in the pass game, screen game, whatever. My impression from watching some of Lee Beebe's film is that he's got some of that about him as well. It seems like Indiana might, this isn't one I'm necessarily prepared to hang my hat on, but might be destined for a season at tight end that's a little bit more kind of split between two players rather than there being like one clear sort of dominant number one tight end the way there was with Zach Horton last year. But Riley Nowakowski has more of a reputation as a blocker. Holden Stays is maybe more your pass catcher. I'm just curious. And then you also have, as we've talked about, I think we talked about this in our previous podcast with Fernando Mendoza, a quarterback that moves around a little bit better and probably changes, your sort of point of attack a little bit in the way that you move him around within the pocket. I wonder if there aren't going to be some positions too that we just kind of reimagine. Slot receiver might be another one where, I know I probably have greater sort of concerns about where Indiana is in the slot than you do. But Curt Cignetti might say, well, last year we were using our slot receivers a lot more because our quarterback couldn't run. So we had to dial up stuff that moved the ball laterally quickly because we couldn't move the pocket, which meant we couldn't change the point of launch and we couldn't move the defense. So we just had to move the ball quickly. Maybe this year, not that the slot has no value, but there's less of that because the quarterback can move a little bit more and the backfield around him is a little bit more versatile, or the tight end space is going to be used a little bit differently. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the numbers, like most of their it's like 80% of their passes in the backfield, and maybe that number's too high, went to Price and Keyshawn Williams. I could see those going now to Hemby and BB instead, where you're just shifting the production over, and so there's not as much focal point. And I don't know that I don't know if you were there for one of these press conferences when he talked about the slot in terms of the workload shifting, cross-training guys more at the slot instead of just having, I think he said the only one that didn't cross-train in the slot in the spring was Charlie Becker. Everybody else worked there. And so instead of having like those dedicated 3 guys that they had last year, it's sort of this work, Jonathan Brady, I think now that they've added him, the Cal transfer will be more of a dedicated slot guy, but all those guys will be able to sort of, they'll just have a lot of different looks there as opposed to just those 3 where they just kind of rotated it out and they were the same sort of very, very similar skill set. And like you said, I think the offense is gonna look different in terms of where the production come from. Like the plays, it's not a different like playbook, but the idea that the targets are different and it's set up for different players as opposed to the production Miles Price had easily go to Roman Hemby. A lot of the quick catches, swing passes, stuff in motion, things like that. And like you said, or Holden Stace in the slot can get some of the stuff downfield. And so those are more like one, kind of playbook or how the offense looks. But I don't think there's question marks about like who's going to get. I think all these players we're talking about are going to be in the rotation. There's no question mark about that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the one other thing that I ask on offense, maybe a little bit more than on defense, is, and I'm curious for kind of I know you asked guys about breakout players. The one that I think of as the best example of this, the best sort of distillation of this curiosity is Omar Cooper, where I think Omar Cooper had a good year last year. I think it's also clear from listening to Curt Cignetti talk about him that Curt Cignetti expects Omar Cooper to push further forward and that there is more of a ceiling there for Cooper to realize. But you kind of wound up in this position if you were Indiana last year where the quarterback was the star, the wide receiver 1 was the star. There were 2 running backs that together kind of did the work of one, like bell cow. There were 3 slot receivers that kind of did the work of one elite receiver. Is there another player on, if we can assume at least a baseline level of performance from Fernando Mendoza, maybe not elite, but robust, good, solid football. Is there another player on this offense that can go up to a first or second team all Big Ten level that makes that just makes the offense even more difficult to defend, not in the aggregate, not in the, Indiana's got a lot of slot guys that can hurt you and they rotate them so they're all fresh, but just purely the way that at times last season teams just could not cover Elijah Surratt, for example. I'm just curious if I wonder if there is a player like that in somewhere in the wings in this offense. I didn't know if that came up at all when you were asking guys about breakout players, or if you have any thoughts on that.
No, but I think I think there's an obvious example, and I'm surprised you wouldn't. I mean, Phoenix City represent, right? Like a guy that was pegged for superstardom 4 years ago in the national or in the playoffs, like EJ Williams, 6'4", has the NFL sort of traits that you want in a receiver, and that size is really hard to cover if he can put it all together and stay healthy. Like that's a guy that I think Mekhi Jackson can be productive. I think Jonathan Brady could be productive. But if you're talking about a guy that's had NFL-like receiver traits since he was in high school and had that buzz about him, that's EJ Williams. He's just never lived up to it. And that's, to me, like, you just can't replicate size or high point catchability and all that stuff, like, that scouts love. Like, he has all that, and there's been glimpses, and you have to go back a couple of years now to really see it. But if you're talking a guy with like that sort of ceiling where it's like, oh, that guy's a game changer, and he just never put it together, like, it would be him, right? I mean, that was the thought after he had that freshman year. That was
who are the other like breakout players that got mentioned to you? I know Elijah Hardy came up. Who are the other ones that?
Well, yeah, Mikhail talked about the whole defensive line, and Surratt talked about Mekhi Jackson, but I told him he cheated because they're friends.
That feels a little.
But at the same time, he's followed a similar trajectory. Was really had a great freshman year at St. Francis. Had a really good year at App State. So I get what I mean. His point is, look, he's done it at every level. I've seen him. He's a gamer, and it's a natural progression for him to kind of follow the same path. But to me, I just think EJ Williams' profile was such that, like, that was the guy he was supposed to be coming out of high school. That's why he was recruited by was final three was Clemson, Auburn, and Alabama. That would be, in terms of the profile you're talking about, just because I just don't see them, Hemby maybe, but like I don't see Curt Cignetti loading up and giving him 25 carries a game.
No.
I just think that's not how he's
maybe not even 25 touches a game, frankly, like let alone carries.
Yeah, I mean, it's just he's had one guy in his offense's sort of reach, I think, 200 carries in the last like 5 years, and so it's just not. It just doesn't seem like that he could break through like that just because of the nature of the offense. Whereas I think EJ Williams would sort of fit that. He's got that kind of ceiling.
Let's wrap this up just by talking about basically, I mean, very simply handling expectations. And I think that on a case-by-case basis, like, I don't think the coach or his staff will think this is an issue. I think they will just point to their past together at JMU, even some of them as far back as Elon. I think the players, will the same ones that were talking about winning the Big Ten in like week 5 last year aren't going to struggle with more expectation this season. I know Curt Cignetti had what I thought was a good line, where he said people keep asking if we can sustain it. I want to build on it, or we want to build on it. But listen, history still tells us it's very hard to sustain something successful, certainly anything approaching that successful at Indiana. And the last time, I don't think it is completely unfair to say that the last time Indiana approached a season with anything resembling this level of expectation, it went tremendously wrong. Now, different coach, different circumstances, in many ways, even different eras. Like, we were barely into the NIL era and the portal and all that. I understand all that. I still think, the first thing that Curt Cignetti had to prove was that you could do what he did last season at Indiana. I don't think it's unfair within reason, allowing for nuance, allowing for, considerations of this. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum argument. I do think it is reasonable to say the next thing that he's got to prove is that he can keep doing it at Indiana. Because when you see a coach do this at Alabama or at Georgia or at Michigan or at USC, you think, well, that these programs are built for this. So if you just find the right coach at the right moment.
Well, so are you saying handling expectations? Are you saying the players or the coach? Because you're talking about Cignetti.
I mean, I'm probably just the whole program, and that I understand that's a very wide lens, but Cignetti himself will tell you it takes the whole group, all the way up and down the organizational flow chart. I just think that to me is the one sort of inescapable thing that maybe is a little bit uncomfortable for IU to talk about, that I still think is relevant going into this season.
Well, maybe, but like the JMU players dealt with the spotlight when they were undefeated at James Madison their last season there. They had game day on campus. ranked for the first time, sort of on the cusp of sort of like the playoff discussion last year. And Cignetti talked about this at Big Ten media days. Like they were a Cinderella, and then they were sort of the villain, and they had to handle that. And they did handle sort of being, the expectations as the season sort of changed. So I don't think it's like out of left field that they are where they are, and they've not dealt with sort of expectations or pressures, and had to focus. And I just think you have still, with the large number of JMU players still on the team and that have been in Curt Cignetti's system for multiple years, that they've established that culture, and they can lean on those guys to sort of help them through those moments. And they've dealt with enough of them in the last 2 years where I just don't think it's like I don't think that it's not something like totally new or totally unexpected that they're dealing with an increased spotlight. And I don't know, what point would that affect them? Like I don't see them stumbling in the non-conference. I don't see them overlooking in Illinois. I just don't know that is as much a concern for when I sort of like look at, predicting out the season or how things go, that's sort of an issue, at least this year, just because of the experience they brought back and the culture that it looked pretty good last year, from the outside at least. And somebody just mentioned the assistant coaches, the continuity that they have there too, I think prevents you from worrying about it. Like if had 2 new coordinators and all these new coaches that didn't really know Cignetti and didn't know his system, and then on top of it didn't know really how he wanted to instill that culture, you'd be more worried. But like they retained everybody except the quarterback's coach, and you got to feel pretty good about I think that as well.
Oh yeah, I also just wonder if the holdover from if I wonder if the ultimate legacy of that raft of JMU transfers isn't success so much as it's that enough of them stuck around long enough to like sort of instill a culture into the program that lasted beyond them. Like that it wasn't just kind of a one season thing where they all just kind of pumped through the system, but I'll give you want one of my patented off the wall metaphors. My granddaddy used to tell me not to use fuel treatment, the stuff you buy at the gas station, because it's heavier than gasoline, so it sinks to the bottom of your tank and it shoots through your system. He said to use something called Marvel Mystery Oil, which is basically the same density as gasoline, so it stays in an even mix with a full tank of gas. That way, you're getting a much more even clean of your fuel injection system and your engine, sort of where the gas goes as you run through a tank of gas. It's a little bit like that. It's the idea.
Bonus Auto Insider today.
There you go. Everyone go buy some Marvel Mystery Oil at your local Walmart or Napa. I wonder if the ultimate legacy of this group is that not just that they came in and had success, but enough of them stuck around long enough that got sort of instilled into the next group, essentially. And that it wasn't just kind of a, they hit on something for 12 months and boom, lightning in a bottle. It was great, but it was that same sort of culture, that same process, that same mentality that led a lot of these guys who were unheralded recruits. Some of them were, D2 transfers, former walk-ons. I think Mikhail Kamara was like a no-star recruit or maybe a low 3-star recruit, something like that, that led a lot of these guys to ultimately find much higher ceilings than anyone anticipated. I wonder if their ultimate legacy is leaving some of that behind, essentially.
Yeah, and Kamara and Fisher, all these guys are veterans. Just the amount of games and snaps that they've played does make a difference. And even some of the returning Indiana guys like Carter Smith is a guy now that has been around a long time, and so like you said, that does matter.
Just for the record, Mesbro99 says our granddaddies hung out at the same garage. So Marvel Mystery, I put some in my tank the other day. I'm telling you, it works. That's who we're going to get. We should get that as a sponsor for the podcast. Mind Your Banner is brought to you by Marvel Mystery Oil, which you can find at Walmart and auto parts stores and pretty much nowhere else. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. I don't know if we'll do another podcast this week. We will be back at latest Monday to kind of set up the Puerto Rico trip. I'll be making the trip down to San Juan for IU's 3-game swing through there. And we're going to get some time with the basketball team later this week. So we will, from that, build a bit of a preview of that preseason tour for all of you into next week. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star and the Bloomington Herald-Times, he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Thanks so much for watching, for listening. We'll talk to you soon.